What is up? It's Hobbyist first. Every hero and every villain has an origin story. Grab your paintbrush, put on your headphones, and listen to mine. In this episode of A Hobbyist's Journey, I'm going to talk about how I got into the hobby, and before I do that, I think it's important to define what the hobby means, what it means for me, and what it might mean for other people that you know, or for you yourself. So for me, the hobby is the building, painting, converting, and kit bashing of miniatures for use in tabletop war games, mostly Warhammer, but also games like Star Wars Legion, and in the past, Flames of War, and other things that use painted miniatures, but also painted scenery, terrain, and tabletops that represent a battlefield. So that's the hobby part of it, but for me, the hobby also includes the gaming that goes along with those miniatures. Now, for me, most of that gaming is of the social type, which means I get together with friends in my basement studio, or I get together with friends at their house or at a local game store, and we play games that the winner or loser doesn't really matter. We've also been involved in some campaigns. Once in a while, I'll attend a tournament and play Warhammer games competitively, but generally speaking, for me, the hobby is building and painting the art of the miniatures, and it's using them in games, mostly social. I will say, though, that for some people, the hobby could involve collecting models, painting models, or only playing. And some players, their hobby is playing competitively, and they rely on commissioned painters like me and others to produce the miniatures that they would use in those games. So for everybody, the hobby means something different, but I think it's important to distinguish what the hobby means to me before I get into the origin story. So how did I get started out with miniature gaming? When I was young, my parents were split up, and I spent time with my dad, and we would go, when I was around the age of 5 or 6, to watch trains go by. And I remember the feeling as a little kid of the thunderous rumble of a train as it went by. We got to stand really close to it, and just the size and scale and the noise of these awesome machines going by. And it was great free entertainment for my dad and I, just to hang out by the train tracks and watch a train go by. And I left that wanting to see more trains. Like, as soon as the train was gone, I wanted to see more. So my father took me to a hobby store that had a massive train layout set up there. And I was able to put my face up to the plexiglass and see multiple trains going by on tracks with hills and mountains and water features, little people, cars, animals, structures with lights in them, and I was enthralled as a little kid by the incredible detail that somebody went and put into these models to bring these scenes to life. And I remember going to the hobby store and wanting the trains, obviously, and my dad got some, just enough for us to set up on his basement or his living room floor, and it allowed us to make one circuit of track. And I remember spending most of a weekend getting the train to successfully make it around one time. And then by the time we successfully got that, my dad would be like, all right, we're done, we have to put it away. And I was left wishing that I could see the train go around again, and a week or two later, we would go at it again. But at that same hobby store, my dad bought me a small box set of some Dungeons & Dragons miniatures made by Grenadier, I believe called Swamp Denizens. And I didn't know how to paint or anything with these miniatures, and I was probably way too young to have these things, but I remember as a kid being totally interested in the scale and the detail of these little lizard men. I think there was a bugbear and a snake, and I had them for a long time, and over the course of my childhood, that little box of miniatures got lost, but I still have it logged. I know what it is, and I'm sure I could go on eBay and get it back again and paint them, which, as even talking about it, it's probably something I should do. But I had these miniatures, didn't really understand what they were connected to as a game or anything. But I also spent a lot of time as a child playing with Lego. My dad bought me my first Lego set when I was 8, and it was a firefighting helicopter. It was a 1980s set. It was very basic compared to what today's Lego sets have. But I remember there was a little decal of a firefighter symbol on one of the bricks, and I still have all those pieces somewhere in my box of Lego bricks from myself and my children, just stockpiling them over years. Again, should probably go back and find that and build it again. I bet that would be fun. But Lego was a big thing for me, and the experience of building models and seeing these things in a scale form and being able to create. And then as I grew a little bit older, I got into action figures. Most of my action figures were G.I. Joe, but I did have some Star Wars stuff. And a fun activity for me by myself in my room as a little kid was setting up these battle scenes. And I would use things like Tonka trucks and building bricks, and I would build, much like Woody in the Toy Story movies, I would build these worlds that involved many of my toys, and I would move around the room almost like a cinematographer and get low and look at these scenes and look at this stuff and move things around. And as a little kid, I used what I had, and it was very fun to play with these small scale versions of soldiers and these scale versions of vehicles and trucks, and to act out these scenes. Now, as a student in high school and middle school, I built a lot of military scale models. Now, I had no ability to paint them, and I was of the skill of getting glue on my fingers and fogging up the canopies on all these aircraft, and I probably had bare plastic with decals poorly put on. But that was the level of my modeling in middle school and high school. And my art teacher, who I would count as probably the most significant mentor in my life, my art teacher said that there was a major called industrial design that would allow me to go to college and prepare for a career as a toy designer. And I thought that was the most awesome possible plan. I remember seeing the toy designers in the movie Big, and I thought, that's not a real job. And she said, all the things that you see, somebody has to design them. So that was all I needed to hear. And my art teacher sent me off to the Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT, and I spent 4 years there studying industrial design with the goal of becoming a toy designer and working for a company like Fisher-Price or Lego or Hasbro, developing products and toys for them. I completed my 4 years there and received my degree in industrial design, and I wasn't exposed to Warhammer until my 4th year at RIT. I was working as an RA, which is a resident advisor, and the job there is just, you're an upperclassman on a floor in the dorms of underclassmen, and your job is to make sure that these students that are new to college are adjusting, or that their needs are being met, and you're there to come up with some fun activities for them to do, and you're building community in the dorms. And as I'm meeting the students and they are moving in and I'm going room to room and introducing myself, I came upon a room that had a student with 3 Warhammer miniatures on display on his dresser. And I was immediately drawn to them. I'd never seen Warhammer things before. And I said, what are these? I need to know more about these things. And he said, these are things for Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40K, or 40,000. And I said, tell me more, tell me more. I was so excited to learn about them. And he explained to me that they were for a game that involved building and painting the models, and then you play with them. And I thought, I could probably do that as a person who was majoring in a major that had model building and illustration and drawing as part of it. So I asked him to teach me how to paint, and he said, well, let me start you off with a couple White Dwarf magazines. He sent me back to my room with a stack of White Dwarfs, and I was blown away by the art in the White Dwarfs and the displays of miniatures and the full armies that were there, because at this point all I'd seen was a Lehman Russ battle tank, an Avatar of Cain, and Azhag the Slaughterer on a red wyvern, and those were enough to hook me. And as soon as I saw the White Dwarfs, I said, this is a hobby that I have to get into. And I quickly learned that there was a large gaming store very close to campus, and I went there and purchased 1 blister pack just to get my feet wet in the miniature collecting hobby. And I remember it was a 2-pack of Orc Biggins, which are just like Orc Boys that are larger for Warhammer Fantasy, and they were metal and had a slotted tab on them and a base, and I was excited to bring them back to my dorm room, put them together, glue them, and paint them. So that was my introduction to Warhammer. It was a freshman telling me as a senior about his hobby, and he was gracious enough to share that with me, taught me how to paint, let me borrow paints and brushes until I had my own supplies, and I have been involved in the Warhammer hobby ever since, and that was, I believe, 1997. So that's going to end this episode of Hobbyist Story. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing about my origin and my entry and backstory that got me into the miniature wargaming hobby. If you like hearing more about my story, there will be further episodes. And if you want to see any of my army displays, please subscribe to the channel and check out the rest of the videos that I've posted of army showcases for both Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40K, and Star Wars Legion. And I appreciate your time here. Take care.